As a Muslim, he says, yes, Islam denies Jesus' death on the cross, and I am a Muslim, but I confirm that Jesus' death on the cross is historically certain. Okay, so Jesus certainly exists. Okay, what can we know about him? Well, of the scholars that study him, and keep in mind, there is an entire area of historical studies called historical Jesus studies. So we have scholars who've been studying this on all sides. These aren't all Christians by any means. Actually, the most influential ones wouldn't align themselves with Orthodox Christianity. Let's put the resurrection aside for a bit. What is the most common alternative hypothesis for the resurrection of Jesus? Number one, it's that the disciples hallucinated Jesus. They hallucinated his return.
Talk about 3 historical facts about Jesus that even most critical scholars agree on, whether they're Christian, atheist, or somewhere in between.
First, let's start with Christianity. What are the sources regarding Christianity? And some of you might be even asking, Nabil, why should I even believe Jesus is real? Why should I ever even believe that he's a man who existed? The first thing I'm going to start off by telling you is that it is incontrovertible according to the historical principles of investigation that a man named Jesus existed in the first century. How do we know this? We have over 40 records of Jesus' life from ancient times describing this man who is essentially a carpenter in Palestine. He didn't have much of anything. He wasn't a centrally important figure at the time, yet we have 40 sources that refer to him. You know who the emperor was at Jesus' time? Someone shout it out. Tiberius. Good. Tiberius was the emperor of Rome at that time. Now this is a man who obviously we should have a lot written about. We can expect tons and tons of records about this man, can't we? The historical records contain Tiberius' name by 10 different individuals. That's it. 10 for Tiberius, the emperor of Rome, 40 for Jesus. You can see we have excellent reason to believe that this man, Jesus of Nazareth, lived and existed in the first century. And that's why very, very few, in fact, I could probably count it on one hand, actually, I know of 2, scholars who study the historical Jesus actually claim that Jesus never existed, and one of them is Bob Price, who most other scholars say is just not even possible what he says. So we can dismiss just due to the reasoning and due to the lack of scholastic support that this is actually the case. So Jesus certainly exists. Okay, what can we know about him? Well, of the scholars that study him, and keep in mind, there is an entire area of historical studies called historical Jesus studies. So we have scholars who've been studying this on all sides. These aren't all Christians by any means. Actually, the most influential ones wouldn't align themselves with Orthodox Christianity. You have people like Paula Fredrickson, Marcus Borg, Bart Ehrman. You have people along these lines who would say, like John Dominic Crossan, who would say that of Jesus we can know for a fact that he died on the cross. Now keep in mind, that's one of our 3 points that we're proving for Christianity or attempting to show to determine its reliability. Did Jesus die on the cross? The scholars who study his life, regardless of whether they're atheist, Buddhist, agnostic, Hindu, Christian, it doesn't matter. They all conclude that Jesus died on the cross. Now, if I left it there, it would be an appeal to authority, and we're trying to be academically rigorous tonight, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give you some of their reasons why they believe Jesus died on the cross, but we're going to keep it brief because scholars are unanimous on this issue. By the way, it's not just them. Even Muslim scholars will argue that Jesus did die on the cross. How many of you heard of Reza Aslan's book recently, Zealots, that came out this year? A few of you? Reza Aslan's a scholar who has studied the historical Jesus. And as a Muslim, he says, yes, Islam denies Jesus' death on the cross, and I am a Muslim, but I confirm that Jesus' death on the cross is historically certain. In fact, he builds his whole book off the fact that Jesus died on the cross. So even as a Muslim, he says Jesus died on the cross. So why? Why do they say this? Well, because first off, all the evidence that we have, all the records of Jesus' life, which talk about his death, indicate that he did die. If they say anything, it says that he did die on the cross under Pontius Pilate, which is why Paula Fredrickson says, if there's anything we can know about Jesus, anything at all, it's this, that he died on the cross under Pontius Pilate. If you go away from Christian records, you go to Jewish records like Josephus, we can also see in the first century that non-Christians are saying Jesus died on the cross. We go to Gentile scholars, they are also agreeing that Jesus died on the cross. And in fact, we also have some of them saying that these people believe he is risen from the dead. We'll get to that in just a moment. So we have excellent reason to believe Jesus died on the cross because all the records point to that. Plus, if you study the historical process of crucifixion, nobody ever in the entire history of the Roman process of crucifixion, no one ever survived a full Roman crucifixion.
Let's talk about 3 historical facts about Jesus that even most critical scholars agree on, whether they're Christian, atheist, or somewhere in between. Now, we're not talking about faith claims here. We're talking about what historians, people who study the first century evidence, actually agree upon when it comes to Jesus of Nazareth. And there are 3 big ones. Fact number 1. Jesus died by crucifixion. Virtually no credible historian denies this anymore. Even scholars who don't believe in the resurrection, like Bart Ehrman, a well-known agnostic New Testament critic, admit that Jesus' death by Roman crucifixion is one of the most certain facts of ancient history. The Romans were experts at killing people. When they crucified someone, that person didn't survive, so the idea that Jesus actually died on the cross isn't a theological opinion, it's a historical reality. Fact number 2. Jesus' disciples genuinely believed that he rose from the dead. Now, notice what I said. That doesn't automatically mean he did rise from the dead. But what historians agree on is that his followers sincerely believed that he did. These were men who ran away in fear when Jesus was arrested, and yet, only weeks later, they were publicly proclaiming that he had risen, even when it cost them their lives. Something happened that completely transformed them from terrified fishermen into bold witnesses. And remember, people don't willingly die for something they know is a lie. And then, fact number 3, some of Jesus' known enemies became believers after claiming to have encountered him risen from the dead. We're talking about people like James, Jesus' own brother, who during Jesus' ministry didn't believe in him at all. And Paul, who literally persecuted Christians, trying to wipe the movement out. Yet both of them, independently, became convinced that Jesus appeared to them alive after his death, and both ended up dying for that belief. Now, historians don't just brush that off. These are strong data points that need an explanation. Something happened that changed the trajectory of these people's lives forever.
Oh, they were crucifying people by the hundreds, especially when it came time, around Jesus' time, all the way till the fall of the temple. They were crucifying people by the hundreds to make a point. That if you rebel against the Romans, we will humiliate you, we will torture you, and we will destroy you and your people. And that's exactly what was happening to all the Jews who were amongst this rebellion that happened in the late 60s, beginning of the 70s, in the 1st century AD. Not a single one of them survived the process of crucifixion. Why? Well, first there's a flogging process. And this flogging isn't light. It's not like caning. The flogging process went with a Roman flagrum. Now, if you understand what a flagrum is, it's a whip that has 6 leather cords that come off of it. And each of those leather cords has leather balls at the end with shards of bone and metal dumbbells. As a person would be whipped, this whip was designed to cause extreme vasodilation on the skin. You have those metal dumbbells there for that reason, to bring the blood vessels, to bring lots of blood to the fore, to bring pain receptors to the surface. And then those bones, those shards of bones would latch into the skin and rip it off. So you would bleed more blood than you otherwise would. That's how this whip was designed. Oh, this whole process of crucifixion was designed to be as painful, as torturous as possible. Cicero, I believe it was Cicero, who said that let no Roman citizen even think or hear the word crucifixion. And Roman citizens were not allowed to be crucified. This was reserved for the most treacherous criminals. Not a common criminal, the worst criminal. It was also said that arteries and veins were laid bare during the process of the crucifixion. Of the flogging. That people's intestines often fell out because their abdominal wall was ripped open. This was horrific, and people often died during the flogging process. It's called the pre-death for that very reason. And in the case of Jesus, we know that something happened. According to the Gospel of John, Jesus was flogged more than normal because Pilate wanted to bring Jesus back in front of the crowd and say, look, we've flogged him. Do you still want to crucify him? We've punished him. And they say, no, crucify him. It would stand to reason that he flogged him more than they thought they would in order for him to say, okay, let's go ahead and release him. But they said, no, let's crucify him. So we have excellent reason to believe Jesus died on the cross. Did he rise from the dead? This is an important matter. And lots of historians say we cannot investigate the resurrection because that's not a historical matter. That's a supernatural matter. And you can't study supernatural matters. Well, that's jumping the gun just a bit. If every explanation that is naturalistic falls short and falls very short of explaining what happened, then we have reason to believe that something supernatural may have happened. If there simply is no good explanation, naturalistically speaking, we can use the historical process of investigation to conclude that quite likely maybe something supernatural happened here. Let's put the resurrection aside for a bit. What is the most common alternative hypothesis for the resurrection of Jesus? Number one, it's that the disciples hallucinated Jesus. They hallucinated his return. And the argument goes as follows. People who have followed a man like Jesus, their spiritual leader, for years and years and years, they've grown to love him. Of course we can expect them to see the risen Jesus after he dies. They hallucinated him. They loved him so much he returned to them, at least in their eyes. And we know that people today, and this part is true, we know that people today often see their loved ones after they died. That must have happened with Jesus' disciples. They saw Jesus after he died.
So, even among skeptical scholars, there's widespread agreement on these three facts. Jesus really died by crucifixion. His disciples really believed he rose from the dead. And former skeptics and enemies of Jesus came to faith because they believed they saw him alive. Now, what you do with those facts, that's where worldview comes in. Some will say it was hallucinations. Others will say it was legend. But here's the thing. None of those theories fully explain all three facts together without stretching credibility. The resurrection of Jesus, as incredible as it sounds, still stands as the best explanation for the evidence we have. So even if you're not sure what to believe, it's worth asking. What happened in first century Jerusalem that was powerful enough to turn fearful fishermen, unbelieving brothers, and even a persecutor into world changers willing to die for one message? He is risen. Let us talk about why the resurrection isn't just a side note in Christianity. It is actually the foundation that the entire faith stands on. If you remove the resurrection from Christianity, the whole thing collapses. It's not just another miracle story. It is the story. It's the claim that turned a small, scared group of disciples into a movement that transformed the world. Think about it. When Jesus was crucified, his followers were completely devastated. They didn't expect him to die. They expected him to overthrow Rome. They thought the story was over, and yet, just a few days later, these same men were publicly declaring that Jesus had risen from the dead, in the very city where he was executed. That's not something you make up when everyone around you could prove you wrong. And here is what's even more fascinating. The resurrection wasn't just a private vision or an emotional experience. It became the message. The earliest Christian sermons, recorded in Acts, aren't about Jesus, teachings or his miracles, though those are important. They're centered on one bold claim: this Jesus whom you crucified, God has raised from the dead. That's the foundation. Because if the resurrection happened, then Jesus wasn't just another moral teacher. He was exactly who he said he was, the Son of God, the Savior of the world. It means his death wasn't a tragedy, it was a triumph. It means sin was defeated, death was conquered, and hope actually has substance. And historically speaking, this one event explains something no other theory can. How did Christianity, a movement that started with no political power, no money, and no army, rise so rapidly in the heart of the Roman Empire of all places? These early believers didn't spread Christianity through conquest or wealth. They spread it through conviction. They were willing to face imprisonment, torture, and even death because they truly believed Jesus had risen. So when people say Christianity is just one religion among many, the resurrection changes that. Because no other faith in history is built on a verifiable claim about something that happened in time and space. A tomb that was found empty, witnesses who went to their deaths proclaiming what they saw, and a movement that should have died in the first century but instead reshaped the world. As the Apostle Paul put it bluntly in 1 Corinthians 15, if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. In other words, Christianity invites you to test it, to examine the evidence, because it's not just based on feelings or tradition, it's grounded in history. So, why did Christianity rise? Because the message of the resurrection wasn't a metaphor. It was a revolution. It was the moment God stepped into history, conquered death, and proved once and for all that love has the final word.